Stalkers. There's a lot of ways you can scare somebody, but you want to scare a real, certified gamer? You're gonna have to get creative. You can have 250 gigabytes of uncompressed footstep audio in your game, but technology's only good for so much when it comes to actually moving the genre forward. Horror traditionally is less about budget and more about ingenuity, but coming up with shit's hard. And even if you do have an interesting idea for a story or a cool art style, then you gotta make an entire video game on top of that. And for the record, it can't just be like a BMX Flash game with pictures of ghouls in it. You have to actually put in mechanics that make the game scary. So when somebody figures out a way to scare you and people actually enjoy playing it, yeah, that shit's gonna get run into the ground. To put it simply, a stalker type enemy, sometimes referred to as a chaser, which is basically a big guy that follows you around and tries to kill you, but unlike most game enemies, you can't fight back. At best, you might be able to stun them temporarily, but their continued looming presence has to be a core part of the gameplay. Probably most famous from Amnesia: The Dark Descent, a lot of horror games have them. But what was the first Stalker? I don't fucking know. Sinistar? Who gives a shit? I'm not here to talk about history, I'm here to talk about things I like Clock Tower. It's a genuinely tense SNES game, mostly because of its stalker enemy, which really isn't that mechanically different from how most games handle it now. For a while, this guy made Clock Tower its own totally unique thing. Unless you count the fact that he's a one-to-one copy of the villain from Phenomena, and the fact that the main character of Clock Tower is also a one-to-one copy of the main character from Phenomena, and how a bunch of the game's events are ripped directly from Phenomena. The point is, he's a very solid early execution of the concept. He defined it for a while. The music, the ambience, the level design, every bit of presentation is working together to build this guy up so that you're almost more scared when he's not on screen. And that, to me, is the mark of a genuinely good stalker. Mr. X, for instance, is way scarier when you hear his toes slapping against the tile in some room on the other side of the police station. It's like a real killer, or a Genshin Impact fan. Just knowing there's one in your general area is enough to create an atmosphere of tension. Mr. X is also a great example of the mechanical reasons to have a stalker in your game. Sure, Resident Evil 2 Remake isn't an easy game, but a few hours in you start to feel comfortable with your surroundings and you're zipping around the police precinct without much issue. Then the game says, okay, now that you're familiar with the layout, it's time to get a pop quiz on where the exits are.
Quiz, hotshot.
But what if you're not afraid of an 8-foot-tall blue man who's always wearing an expression like he just saw a rat run out from underneath the dryer? Maybe you want something simpler, something more relatable. White Day, A Labyrinth-Named School is a 2001 Korean PC game developed by Sonnery Corp. It's essentially the missing link between point-and-click hybrids like Clock Tower and the type of stuff that Frictional Games would be making a few years later. White Day is one of my favorite horror games ever made, and the stalker at the heart of it is a big reason why. It's also a buggy mess that gets progressively more broken the longer you play it, and the stalker at the heart of it is a big reason why. Believe it or not, this dude and his goofy ass laugh scared me more than maybe anything in any horror game before or since. Like, I'm not crazy, right? That's scary. The way you can hear the air getting beaten out of that dude's lungs is fucked. I don't find him as scary these days, mostly because I found out it's really, really easy to break his AI. But having just like a guy who limps after you and tries to kill you in a setting as grounded as a school, it's distressing in a very real way. When I was a teenager playing this game, he always seemed to work seamlessly. But that's mostly because I could only get through the first area of the game without pissing my pants so hard it burst out the front and broke my laptop. Because the first area, Main Building 1, is clearly the one that's best designed to hold him. It's a tight, linear path full of classrooms that creates a sort of tension when you realize you're gonna have to backtrack past him to make progress. This falls apart a little bit in Main Building 2, which is less of a maze and more just a series of wide hallways stacked on top of each other, which can sometimes cause him to, It's still stressful, but the environment just isn't as cinematically designed to scare you. There's no long pitch black hallway with a bucket strategically placed right in the center so that you kick it in the dark and scare the shit out of yourself. And then you get to the new building, which is a whole other fucking thing. Aesthetically, I love it. It's really cool to be in a modern open floor plan after so much of a generic school. But unfortunately, the open floor plan completely fucks everything. See, remember when I said the janitor has a limp? It doesn't actually make him that slow, but that slight speed advantage comes in clutch when you're talking about the winding hallways of the first couple buildings. But here, the layout's a lot less like a school and more like a prison block. Just a huge square with a lot of vertical visibility and almost nothing to hide behind. And the janitor's limp makes him way too easy to get away from in a space like this. Or it would if he was in this level. The new building introduces the second janitor, the one with a hat. He doesn't have a limp and can run a lot faster as a result. I think he's too fast, actually. Because you're so exposed in the new building, it's way more annoying to sneak around because if you do get seen, he books it over to you in a matter of seconds, which is made worse by the fact that the puzzles here have you running up and down the stairs a million times anyways. So you either have to take it extremely, extremely slow or get seen and chased until you duck back into the one part of the level that still has hallways. You used to be able to hide under the stairs and he wouldn't be able to get to you, so he would just give up after a little while. Now he just sits there and stares at you like he's mocking you. So sure, maybe White Day isn't a great video game, and maybe the stalker system isn't well implemented, but I mean, how can you say no to that face? Also, while I was researching this video, I found out they made a sequel that came out earlier this year. The stalkers in that one are cops, so I guess they're just gonna shoot you with a gun. But man, that would suck though, right? A stalker that could just like shoot you with a gun from 100 yards away. Siren, or Forbidden Siren if you're, European, is a horror series created by Keiichiro Toyama, the original creator of Silent Hill. It's 2 PS2 games and 1 PS3 soft reboot remake thing that's actually really cool. They're also aesthetically some of the coolest games ever made. They are essentially a series of stealth puzzle escape rooms linked together by a non-linear narrative and just some of the wildest cutscenes you'll ever see. The stalkers in this game are called Shibito. They exist in a small, isolated village and function kinda like zombies, except they retain most of their personality. So yeah, it's a lot like Resident Evil 4. But where the Ganados have blatant natural weaknesses as a result of the very well documented scientific process that brought them about, the Shibito are pretty much just an act of God. The rivers turn red and blood falls from the sky, so basically get fucked. The thing that really gets me about Shibito is that if you set aside their insatiable urge to kill, which I'll admit is a bit of a hurdle, but if you ignore that, you really start to get the sense that this could be a stable, functioning community. It's pretty creepy how they live to kill every human in service of their god, but also do some gardening and make a nice dinner for their family. It's pretty crazy seeing a Shibito police officer just go about his duty and stop to shoot a random guy. Okay, that's not that crazy. In Blood Curse especially, they fucking love being Shibito. They think that shit is so funny. Now, these might be the loosest example of stalkers on this list because you can kill quite a few of them, but they usually come back unless you can take care of their nest, which isn't always an option. I think the fact that the core gameplay is designed around you avoiding even being seen by these guys and running away if you do get seen means they do count. And aiding you in that is one of the most unique takes on the stalker system I've seen. Sight jacking is a mechanic that lets you see through the eyes of nearby people, Shibito or otherwise. In the original game, you essentially tune it like a TV antenna. You tilt the stick in the direction of the enemy and then assign it to a face button. It's kind of unwieldy at first, but they save your hotkeys when you die, and if you're very, very patient, it can be really helpful. They also give you a little flash of the enemy's point of view every time they see you, which is mostly there so you can have a heart attack sneaking around and suddenly getting 10 frames of a guy pointing a gun at the back of your head. Blood Curse uses split screen so you can still see your own point of view while sight jacking, and it even does it automatically during chases. Unfortunately, it also turns the game into a PowerPoint presentation, but I mean, it's the PS3. The actual experience of playing Siren is kind of a nightmare. It's almost entirely trial and error. It's kind of like Hotline Miami if instead of getting right back into the action half a second after you die, you just sort of like tiptoe through a field for 20 minutes. It's not my favorite gameplay in a horror game, but finally figuring out the optimal route through a level and getting all the side objectives while you do it does feel really good. Honestly, the story is the main thing that carries the game. They drop you in with basically no information, so slowly uncovering the secrets of the village is really fun, especially when you have this shit to look forward to.
Now I understand.
It's over. I'm going to get out of here before I turn into a monster as well.
But okay, what if normal people don't scare you? What if you want to get chased down and fucking obliterated by an 8-foot tall ogre? But like kind of a cute ogre. Haunting Ground is a 2005 PS2 horror game developed by Capcom that came out right around the time they basically destroyed AAA horror games for about a decade. In a lot of ways, it feels like it was kind of made to balance out Resident Evil 4. They turned that game into a shooter, one of the best ones ever made, granted, but there wasn't a whole lot there for fans of what the original Resident Evil games were going for. So Haunting Ground actually commits to being a genuine exploration-focused, puzzle and item management-based survival horror game in a way a lot of stuff around that time was starting to shy away from. Obviously, I'm not saying it's the last survival horror game that came out on the PS2, but it does kind of feel like a kiss goodbye to the genre in a lot of ways. Goodbye. I'll see you in fucking 2014. It really feels like they flexed as hard as they possibly could on this thing. It's got some of the best graphics on the PS2 and a really incredible soundtrack. It's also one of the last big games of that era to do the cinematic fixed camera angles, and it might be the best at it, like of any game. Haunting Ground does occasionally run into perspective issues, but it mostly gets around that just by having a shocking number of camera angles that flow into each other perfectly. Another really smart, subtle choice is this little snap zoom every time you enter an area. Like, it looks cool, but it's also a really good gradual reveal of the area so you have a second to reorient yourself before you start moving again. And you're gonna need a second because this motherfucker's chasing you. Like Clock Tower 3, the game that Haunting Ground was supposed to be a sequel to, they choose to make their stalkers memorable by giving them distinct personalities that make them feel dangerous. Where Clock Tower kind of goes apeshit and introduces historical serial killers and magical girl fights, Haunting Ground keeps it pretty simple by putting you in a big castle with a bunch of weirdos who want to
That, my dear, is what you will become in the future.
I would love for Capcom to remake this game. I don't think that's happening anytime soon. It takes a shockingly deft hand to tackle the subject matter that this game does while still keeping some of the antagonists kind of likable. It's not that one, not him. Debilitas is the least threatening. He's essentially a tutorial boss while you get used to the rest of the game. You never get the sense that he actively wants to hurt you. He just doesn't understand that bouncing your head off the concrete is bad for you. He's also the only boss you can spare, and getting the best ending requires that you do that. This is a Debilitas appreciation zone. I fucking love this guy. If you have anything negative to say about him in the comments, you can keep it to your fucking self. Daniela is the second stalker. She's a little bit faster and also just really normal. Her whole thing's that she's a homunculus, and she's a little upset about the fact that she can't, like, feel pain or taste anything or experience any sensation at all, really. She's doing great. She's also the source of some of my favorite horror in the entire game. The Joker laugh is what it is, but it's the way she sort of observes Fiona, treats her with curiosity instead of an open hostility. There's a scene where she makes Fiona dinner and she just lays out like 6 bowls of soup all on the table for her, and Fiona just has to sit there like,
"But I cannot taste or experience pleasure or feel pain. Thanks for the meal."
Then there's Ricardo, who is a bad man, and his thing is he's got a gun. He shoots you and then you die. On the bright side, halfway through his level, he turns invisible, so I think the real hero of this game is the tone. From a story standpoint, Haunting Ground is one of the most relentlessly unpleasant games I've ever played. There's just this unceasing creep-ass vibe to the entire game that always feels like it's about to go too far, but it never quite gets there, at least in my opinion. It feels like a way more psychosexual Suspiria, especially with some of the music.
Now, if you would please come with me.
I don't want to. Please let me be. I want to go home.
But Miss Fiona, you are home.
Fiona's having a fucking terrible time the entire game. And Resident Evil has a way of breaking the tension with some goofy dialogue or a storyline that gets progressively stupider as it goes on. But as Haunting Ground goes on, it kind of just feels like a descent into hell. You always feel like you're on the verge of a panic attack. Which brings me to the panic attack system. Like Clock Tower, Haunting Ground has a psychological health system. Getting hit doesn't do damage, it scares you. And once you get scared enough, Fiona just has a full-on meltdown. Goes Looney Tunes mode and bumps into walls and shit, which makes it a lot easier to get attacked again, at which point you do get a game over. To help you out while you're busy running into walls and shit, the game gives you this little baby boy. so cute. Well, in my opinion, not the peak of dog-based horror, it's undeniable that Haunting Ground did popularize the genre. Huey is the closest thing you have to a weapon, so you're gonna want to be nice to him because there's actually a surprising amount of granularity to how effective he is based on your relationship with him. Another thing that's worth noting in relation to how it affects stalkers is the lack of loading screens. In Haunting Ground, if there's an open door, you can run right through it seamlessly into the next area anytime you want. It seems minor, but it's pretty technically impressive for a PS2 game that looks that good, and it adds a lot to that relentlessness of the chases. In fact, just to keep you on your toes, the game has a hidden clock that dictates the next time a murderer is gonna come try and kill you. Just like real life. And honestly, Stalkers and Haunting Ground feel better to hide from than most. The game understands that hiding in a locker is scary for a little bit, and then it gets extremely boring. Here it's programmed to feel like a chase scene in a movie, to the point that when you choose a hiding spot, they immediately send the stalker into the room so they can do their little looking around animation, and then you can get back to playing the game. In a lot of ways, Haunting Ground feels like the Stalker game. It's not the best game with stalkers in it, maybe, but to me it feels like the one that's put the most thought into what stalkers can do for a story and a gameplay loop.
Hey, you're just mad because I'll be able to do something with my fucking guitar hands that you'll never be able to achieve in your entire life, kid. So yeah, you're gay.
Alright, turns out there's a lot of these, so we're gonna just do a lightning round real quick. I don't think Clock Tower for the PS1 is a very good game, but I do think it nails pretty much every aspect of the presentation around Scissorman, and the domestic locations in the first half of the game are really fucking cool. Beware is a stalker game with cars. That's it, they're in a car. The Yomawari games visually are gorgeous, monster designs included, but the actual gameplay of the chases is kind of ass. The closer you get to an enemy, the faster your stamina runs out, which is indicated by this extremely loud heartbeat sound effect that overrides basically everything else in the game. I think it's a little bit loud. It's just a teensy bit overkill to be playing like most of the time you're playing. And that stamina mechanic means you're basically just feathering the sprint button constantly, which isn't scary. It's just kind of mildly hypnotic, I guess. Dead by Daylight is basically a multiplayer stalker game, and it's really cool how they differentiate the stalkers mechanically based on the abilities that character would have. It's also just, it looks like a fake video game in a movie. It looks like a Gmod custom server that would have really racist admins. It looks like a mobile game you would delete after like 5 minutes, and then you look it up later and it's got like 20 million players worldwide for some reason. It looks like a game for the Zeebo, but like bad, like Zeebo games are good. This looks like a bad one of those. Oh fuck. Oh god. I shit talked the Zeebo and now my mic's falling apart. With a lot of stalker AI, it can be tough finding that line between frustratingly aggressive and so lax that you stop feeling any fear. And no game shows that more than Alien Isolation. Personally, my playthroughs have always kind of leaned more towards frustratingly aggressive, but for a lot of people, the alien just doesn't fucking show up. If you're lucky enough to hit that sweet spot though, Alien Isolation is one of the most intricately designed horror games I've ever seen. Resident Evil 4 has the Regenerator, which is a little iffy since you can eventually kill it, but that core idea, making an action game more tense temporarily by making an enemy that grows back what you shoot off, it's really clever, to the point that it's been ripped off in Dead Space and multiple other Resident Evils. 7 is essentially built entirely around that concept. Soma is a great game. But only if you turn the stalkers off. It's a wonderful story about loneliness and that absolutely does not need to be interrupted every 3 minutes by a slow-ass chase sequence. The first time I played it, I kind of hated it until I got to like the last hour of the game where the stalkers stop and the story can actually take over. And what's really cool is disabling the stalkers doesn't delete the enemies from the game, it just makes them non-hostile, so they still wander around the levels aimlessly, which really adds to the sad, lonely feel that the game's got going on. Basically, every RPG Maker game does stalkers the same, which is to say, poorly, but Desert Nightmare at least has like kind of a cool mechanic where you can knock stuff over in the room. That's kind of neat. As far as I know, it didn't steal that from another game, which is shocking to me if true, but it probably did and I just couldn't find it. So sure, stalkers are a little overdone. Most of the time they're not very fun to play against. If you ask a lot of people, they never are. But killing enemies is so core to video games as a whole that I don't really think you're ever gonna see people totally stop trying to subvert that for the sake of scaring you. It's a good idea at its core, but we're maybe a little overdue for a new spin on it. And that's where I come in. You know, stalkers with guns? Players with guns.